Hello and welcome to another episode of Latitude. And in this, we are examining a subject that's been in news for the whole week and perhaps more. These are events in Sri Lanka, perhaps the most shameful in the country's history since it broke away from its colonial past 7 decades ago. The president's house has been stormed by protesters when they lost patience with their peaceful protests. The president's office, the former prime minister, and again, currently prime minister for a short while, his private home was burned, then his official residence was stormed, and his office was stormed. Some of the sights that were witnessed from Sri Lanka had left many of us flabbergasted. And why Sri Lanka has reached this pathetic state of affairs, we have two experts who will enlighten us. We have Mr. N. Sahitya Moorthy from Chennai, who is now an independent analyst and a commentator and has deep understanding, connections, and insight into matters that continue to prevail in Sri Lanka. And we have a research specialist on Sri Lankan affairs from the Institute of Defense Studies and Analysis, Dr. Gulbin Sultana. But I'll go to you, Mr. Moorthy, first. Now, we all have been seeing signs of matters in Sri Lanka steadily declining, but the decline didn't really start in end March when the protesters took to the street. There's quite clearly a long history to it. There is also the story of how, despite all the warnings, the Rajpakse family and their dispensation continued to ignore signs of what was to come. So we are now left with a situation that there is perhaps going to be an interim government, but with no credibility and few takers. At the same time, there is going to be the international cry that more stability is required in Sri Lanka before the required money is to be pumped in for the people to get the basic necessities. Your view, Mr. Moorthy.
As you rightly pointed out, the Rajpakse ruling family did not read the signs on the ball. That is one thing. Two, but this economic crisis by itself has been what I would call hereditary issue for the past 70 years for a variety of reasons. Let us not go into it right now. But the other side of it, as you said about the public struggle, is started with the non-availability or shortage of food, fuel, and medicines. It may have stopped as an urban phenomenon. That was how it was. How? But when the impact of the Gotabaya Rajpakse regime's organic farming policy hit every rural home, it assumed a larger proportion than possibly anyone might have thought of. But what is happening today, over the last 1 week particularly, of protesters occupying official, what I would call the symbols of Sri Lankan state, presidential secretariat, then Prime Minister's office, Prime Minister's house was burned. Then yesterday they tried to storm Parliament House, which is the ultimate symbol of democracy and Sri Lankan state. And they also tried to storm the Sri Lankan state media building yesterday. All this, I don't think it's isolated incidents. There are also pre-planned strategy which is heading towards what I would call the urban non-violent insurgency. Because of this, as you rightly pointed out earlier about the international assistance, I think the government is shy of using the armed forces to put down that part of the security. I don't think the army or the security forces of any country would be falling short to stop such non-violent invaders to enter the president's house of secretariat and stay there for 5-10 days. It is not happening because no one wants to take the responsibility in this era of social media and international pressure on human rights, particularly focusing on Sri Lanka, this is continuing to happen. Unfortunately, the West, be it the US, UN, or whoever, who condemned even the police fire opening tear gas shells at protesters, has never condemned the burning down of the residence of Prime Minister or occupation of the symbols of state. And as you may call on May 9, within a matter of 1.5 to 2 hours, homes of 78 ruling party politicians from all the Rajapakse brothers, president downwards, were burned down across southern Sri Lanka.
Yeah.
Till today, no one has, international community has never condemned it. That is, there's a lot to look into it. With the result, the government's hands are tied. And to control this, unless the situation is controlled and the protesters are ready to accept, Parliament is what has to take decisions, which is slowly but surely some of the protest leaders belonging to these groups, because it's only an umbrella organization of moderate and not so moderate protesters, have openly said, we want this. We got the president out, outside parliament, outside constitution, outside legalities. So we will do this, whatever we want from the streets.
Okay, so you've given a very sort of detailed but comprehensive account of the situation that has come to prevail. I'll come back to you to ask that it is the same army in Sri Lanka which in recent years put an end to a very violent insurgency. And here it is unarmed people that are storming the citadels of the country's institutions that define a country in modern times. But Dr. Gulbin, there have been a complete bankruptcy, not just financially, but of ideas of what to do with Sri Lanka and how the situation was evolving. It isn't, I mean, yes, the silent protests suddenly went out of control, but it had been on the streets for many months. Now, Prime Minister Ranil Wickremesinghe had some time ago declared Sri Lanka bankrupt. The energy minister had said that they have only a day's worth of fuel left. The medical system is on the verge of collapse. Patients are being told not to report with illnesses if they can manage at home. Doctors are being asked to choose between severe cases and not so severe cases. And of course, rice, the staple food in many South Asian and Southeast Asian countries, has now disappeared from the shelves of Sri Lanka and their supermarkets. So clearly, it is a situation that one never thought that Sri Lanka would come to. What is your understanding that how things were allowed financially to reach such a stage that people just gave up any hope in the so-called elected government? And here I have a problem with the process of elections and how they throw up regimes and rulers who misuse the democratic mandate to completely clean the country's coffers. Your views?
I think the first problem was like why the situation has reached today the way it is. It's because of the government's denial. There were signs of that economy is declining. There will be problem. Those signs were there like since 2020, even before the pandemic started. But government was in denial mode. And in fact, they continued to do so even till January 2022. They were saying that its situation is not so bad. Some ministers were actually sacked because when they talked about the truth in the month of January this year, the government, the president, the prime minister, they started talking about the real issues, the real problems only when things went out of the control. So I think that is one of the problem. And I think in this forum and also several other platforms, we all have discussed how the faulty policies of Rajapaksa administration, including the organic farming policy, tax cut, deduction in the tax cut. And also I'll include that when 2019 Gotabaya Rajpakse came to power, how they refused to continue the IMF package which they were receiving that time. They did not take the last tranche of this thing. So then a ban on import. I mean, I understand that policy was taken to reduce the expenditure on import, but then you have to understand many of to grow, export growth. Sri Lanka requires some of the imported items. So those policies also actually impacted Sri Lankan economy. It's full of, I think, wrong policies. There were advisors, particularly when the organic farming policy was implemented. Farmers were on the street, and then many of the environmentalists, scientists, they were arguing about these problems, that if they implement the policy overnight, it will affect. But then I think government was not listening to the experts. That was again another major problem this government was having. So I would say that ignorance, arrogance, all these issues actually led to the implementation of the faulty policy. And today I would also mention that now after March, the problem, I would also blame all the political leaders, because opposition political leaders also, even now, they are not united. So I think everybody needs to be blamed. So that is there. And on the part of people also, I think now they are talking about the social fabric, harmony and this thing. But you have to understand, there was a time when Rajapaksa people had the experience. 2005 to 2014 Rajapaksas were in power. So even after that, when they brought Rajapaksas back into power in 2019, they knew very well what the Rajapakshas did, particularly 2010 to 2014. But still, he came back to power. It's because of the racial policy, racial approach of the people. So I think that also needs to be blamed when people are on the street.
The mandate they received was clearly an approval by the people of the racial divide, the communalism, the fear of the minorities that was created by the Rajapaksha. And of course, people knew pretty well what the Rajapakshas were doing, selling off, amongst other things, territory of Sri Lanka to the Chinese, as we know, at least in the case of Hambantota. But Mr. Moorthy, briefly, you talked about the urban insurgency. What came as a surprise to me, that this was the army of Sri Lanka that rewrote the rules of battling insurgency when it went hammer and tongs for the LTTE and destroyed it completely. And this time they just stood by and let the people not just take over the citadels of power, but also allowed President Gotabaya Rajpakse, to escape when he should have been brought to the book like the rest of his family members.
Two or three things. One, I could only guess that the government, whether it was Gotabaya earlier or Ranil now as acting president, I don't think they have given a green signal to the army to go hammer and tongs, as you said in the case of NTT. Then the situation and the decision was very clear. Now it is not. Two, let us accept that this food, fuel famine has affected every human being, including an ordinary soldier on the street. So maybe no one wants to take the risk. Three, as I said about the Western embassies and governments, they are, let us put it clear, they are partial against the government, whichever government is going to be in power there for some more time. That is also encouraged. But on the other hand, I think the other point is wrong, because as they were only waiting for the government's written order to proceed in the case of ensuring law and order, that is not been coming the way possibly they thought, that my guess. But as far as Gotabaya Rajpakse going and they're providing an Air-32 transporter for him to go, he's still the president of Sri Lanka. And the Supreme Commander is incidental, but President has got every authority. And as you say, would have read in the Air Force statement, they are very clear. We are given instructions, is the president, so we are allowing. So I don't think you can find fault with them. In case they had not done it, possibly there would have been a constitutional breakdown in one more stage.
Well, it's a matter of another debate. We'll come back after a break on how far can you go to prevent a constitutional breakdown when all institutions have been raided and virtually demolished. So I think for the military to take the fig leaf cover to say constitutional authority still rests with the president that the people are hounding for, who the people had elected, and allow him to flee when the rest of his family is being kept under vigil is a matter of another debate, but that after a break. Welcome back. We are looking at the crisis in Sri Lanka, and we have our two hands-on expert on Sri Lanka, Mr. Sahitya Moorthy and Dr. Gulbin Sultana. So Dr. Gulbin, to you now, and I want to understand the real depths to which their economy has fallen. Sri Lanka owes over $50 billion for interest to loans that it has taken. Sri Lanka doesn't have the money to make loan repayments now. Its currency has collapsed by 80%. Costs of living last were close to 60% higher than they were earlier. And IMF and other global bodies are not willing to lend any more money to Sri Lanka until they have stable government. And stability seems a far cry from the situation as it prevails today, as well as tourism, which is the mainstay of the economy, will only get revived when the country has some kind of stability. And finally, the Chinese, who many blame for the state of affairs in Sri Lanka, are keeping hands off from a country which they have helped destroy in a way. Your views?
That is what my view was, that even if president resigns, that is a different debate. If people want them to go and all. But the problem is, even if he resigns and a new government is in power, I think that economic problem will continue, and there will not be any immediate solution. Because first of all, whatever India is providing, approximately $3.8 billion, but that's also again, in the form of loans. And whatever assistance they will get from other countries, they will also be in the form of loans. Then secondly, they are relying heavily on IMF, though IMF package will also be a loan, but at least they are thinking they'll get a huge amount so they can manage. But then IMF package, as you have rightly mentioned, depends on implementation of lots of, fulfilling lots of conditions they put. Now they have defaulted. There will all the creditors, they will have to come into consensus to restructure the debt. And then, again, the governance system, Sri Lankan stable government, they need to improve the governance system. So in my understanding, the first thing at this point, though immediate economic relief is the most important thing the people are looking for. But the problem is they need to focus, the political parties and everybody need to focus on have some kind of political stability, because unless they have a proper government, they cannot continue the IMF negotiation that's going on. Only 2 rounds of negotiations have happened, but they will have, earlier it was expected that they may have some kind of, agreement by August. Now it seems it will be very difficult. Coming to other countries also, they like US, Japan, they have said earlier they committed, but then now they have said they can provide some assistance only after IMF package was finalized. So all those problems will be there. And as you rightly mentioned, that unless there is stability, the other sectors economy cannot grow. So all those problems will be there. So I don't see any immediate solution to the problem. The only thing probably will have is distribution of the essential items immediately. because people right now, they don't have fuel, food and medicines and essential items. So what the government needs to do, they need to have some kind of mechanism in, in the coming weeks, so that people have at least some kind of fuel in their home to, cook food, some medicines to, survive. All these things, I think should be there.
Well, Dr. Gulbin's given us a very, very detailed analysis of the state of play of the international lenders and Sri Lanka's economy. But Mr. Moorthy, back to another very important issue, and that is, what can India do now? I mean, she mentioned that India has provided almost up to 8 billion in loans, assistance, credit lines, food supplies, medical supplies, everything else. But is there any thinking about out-of-box ideas that India can explore? Because it's a very controversial view, but I don't want to shy away from it. Sri Lanka is strategically very important to India. And the fact that China has made inroads there with its deep pockets, just like it has made in all our neighborhood, in Nepal, in Bangladesh, of course, Pakistan is a Chinese vassal, and Sri Lanka was almost going that way. Can India use this situation by bringing both economic happiness to the people of Sri Lanka and a strategic equation wherein, without being too embarrassed to do what America has often done, and even China has been trying to do everywhere, that India makes its footprint far, far more obvious in the political, economic, and the social situation in Sri Lanka for a price? Is that possible?
I wouldn't advise that. Yes, economic package, as Ranil Wickremesinghe said, first he said is Aid Sri Lanka consortium involving all nations. But after talking to all of them, he came up with one of his last suggestion was Asia consortium of India, Japan, and China, which means something he has seen that the West is not going to do it that early or that easy. One, maybe India can take the initiative going beyond what it can afford and what it can do and what it is doing to bring together a new consortium of Southeast Asian and West Asian nations without actually being seen as doing it to aid Sri Lanka. Because we can't put, let us be honest, we can't put all the bill all the time. Even the IMF, for instance, they are, Wickremesinghe has said he is expecting demanded asked for only $6 billion, which in monthly expenses takes care of 6 to 8 months, not more. The economy has to stabilize. All this 6 billion will go into importing essentials, as Dr. Gulbin said. As far as the political thing is concerned, India has to be exceptionally and extremely careful in terms of the insurgency or the political opposition that is there. They are not India friendly, right? So it is better, as India is doing, and our External Affairs Minister Jaishankar has been saying in the last 1 week, to let Sri Lanka decide for themselves the next course of political action. Let us continue to work with the government that the people get or elect or select, whatever that be. And strategically, as you know, that we have made certain improvement, particularly with the Colombo security conclave. Even in the midst of all this crisis, they met in Cochin. They are taking it forward. It will be a slow process. But as you would know, neither US during JRJ's time in the 70s, in the Cold War era, nor China today, they have not been able to set foot there militarily. So that is our advantage and disadvantage. Disadvantage because we can't expect to do that, and we don't need a base in Sri Lanka or in our neighborhood. We have got.
No, I think it's very well brought out, sir. I think we're not looking, and I've always believed that I think it's foolish for us to look for a military base in Sri Lanka when we are all over the place as far as the Indian Ocean waters go. But what we can strategically do is ensure.
And we are working with them slowly but surely and steadily, I think we have to progress that. First, the denial part of it has more or less worked out because China has not only not there economically, strategically, but they are also not there economically as we see today. And after Ranil Wickremesinghe's previous government gave away the Hambantota territory, it was not Mahinda Rajapaksa.
Okay. So we're completely out of time, sir. I think you've made your point firmly. Dr. Gulbin, you'll have to forgive me. I don't think I have time for a question from you, though. Let me give it a shot. Let me take a quick take from you. How is China going to respond to any Indian excessive presence there beyond what it has been in the last decade? Quickly, just one short answer.
Definitely. I mean, China will not like it because we have seen like what China did on as its response to conclave security when Chinese foreign minister visited in January. He proposed for some kind of island or kind of conference and asked Sri Lanka to be the leader of that kind of composition. So we all know that China will never take it positively. And
well, clearly, the ball is in South Block's court. The options are many, but out-of-the-box thinking may just give India the strategic advantage that it was looking for in the waters of the Indian Ocean. What New Delhi does will be a matter of debate in the coming months, but that is for another show. Thank you very much for being with us. Until our next episode, goodbye.